3 days. Only 3 days separated my life from death, and I had no idea. The plan was crafted down to the smallest details, hidden in the pocket of a suit jacket that I had ironed that very morning. Hello, my dear viewers. I'm Elizabeth Morrison. I'm 82 years old, and today I'm going to share with you the story that completely changed the course of my life. Before I continue, I'd like to ask that you like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps me a lot to continue sharing my stories here, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. I was born in 1943 in a small town in rural Kentucky. We were a simple family, but we never lacked the essentials. My father worked in the fields and my mother took care of us, her 6 children. I was the third oldest. From a young age, I learned to sew from my grandmother, who made the most beautiful dresses in the region. My hands always had a way with fabrics, transforming scraps into pieces that people admired. When I turned 18 in 1961, my parents decided that we needed to try life in the big city. The situation in our small town was difficult, and Chicago seemed like the place where dreams came true. I remember it like it was yesterday. We arrived with 2 cardboard suitcases, carrying everything we owned. We lived in a tenement building in the South Side, where we shared a small room for the entire family. I got a job at a small clothing factory. I worked Monday through Saturday from 7 in the morning to 7 at night, with only half an hour for lunch. The salary was small, but I saved every cent I could. I dreamed of one day having my own business, creating my own pieces. At night after work, I still did small repairs for the neighbors, charging very little, just to save a bit more money. It was on a Sunday afternoon in 1962 that I met Robert. I was at the park with my younger sisters when he approached us, tall, broad-shouldered, with well-combed hair, and a smile that seemed to light up his whole face. He worked as a salesman in a fabric store and had the gift of gab. He talked in a way that made anyone feel special. With me, it was no different. "Miss, you have the most expressive eyes I've ever seen," he told me during that first meeting. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment, but also with joy. In those days, a respectable young woman didn't spend much time talking with a stranger, but something about Robert held me there. Perhaps it was his confident manner or how he spoke about his plans for the future with such certainty. We started meeting every Sunday, always with my sisters as chaperones, as was the custom. After 3 months, he asked for my hand in marriage. My father, naturally suspicious, thought it all too quick. "Elizabeth, a man in such a hurry is either running from something or trying to get something," he told me. But I was in love, and at 20 years old, I believed that love could overcome any obstacle. We got married in January 1963 in a simple ceremony at the same church we attended. It was a happy day, full of hope. Robert had rented a small apartment near the store where he worked. Our first months were an adjustment period. I continued at the factory, and in my spare time, I made made-to-measure clothes to supplement our income. Robert was ambitious, always saying he didn't want to be an employee forever. "One day, Lizzie," he would tell me, using my nickname, "we're going to have our own business. You'll see. We weren't born to take orders from others." In 1964, I discovered I was pregnant with our first child, Mark. It was an immense joy. Robert seemed like the happiest man in the world when I told him the news. He bought a used crib that he sanded and painted blue himself. That was the first time I saw tears in his eyes when he held our newborn son. "This boy is going to have everything I didn't have," he promised, kissing our baby's forehead. But life with a small child became more difficult. My salary now barely covered the diapers and milk. That's when Robert had the idea for us to start our own business. With our savings and a small loan we got from an uncle of his, we bought 2 used industrial sewing machines. We set up a tiny workshop in the back room of our house. I sewed during the day while looking after Mark. Robert would go out to sell our pieces to shops after his work. At first, we hardly slept. It was exhausting, but we saw every cent that came in as an achievement. I remember falling asleep many times with my head resting on the sewing machine, waking up startled, checking if the baby was still asleep in the crib beside me. In 1966, with our small business growing slowly but steadily, Robert decided to leave his job to dedicate himself entirely to our workshop. It was a risky step, but necessary. He had a talent for business and got bigger contracts than I thought possible for our small atelier. Soon we needed to hire 2 seamstresses to help me. That same year, I discovered I was pregnant again. Our daughter, Lucy, was born in December. A girl with rosy cheeks and curious eyes like her father's. Our family was growing along with our business. By 1968, we had 6 employees and had moved to a small warehouse, all our own. New Horizon Textiles, said the sign at the entrance, a name chosen by Robert. Because we're always looking to the future, he explained. It was also in this year that I noticed the first changes in Robert's behavior. It started with small things, coming home later, phone calls that he would quickly hang up when I approached, a different cologne that I sometimes smelled when he arrived. Nothing I could point to with certainty, just a discomfort, an intuition that I tried to ignore. Our routine followed its course. We would wake up early, take the children to preschool, go to the factory. I took care of production while Robert dealt with suppliers and customers. At night we would return home, have dinner as a family, put the children to bed. An ordinary life, the same as so many other couples building their dreams in that Chicago that never stopped growing. In 1970, our 3rd child, Richard, arrived to complete our family. A quiet baby who hardly cried. Robert seemed less enthusiastic about this pregnancy, but I attributed it to fatigue and concerns about the business, which was facing its first serious crisis due to the lack of some imported materials we used. It was around this time that Robert's absences became more frequent. Business trips that used to last 2 days now extended to a week. When questioned, he would get irritated, saying I didn't understand the pressure he faced to maintain our family and our business. If it weren't for me, Lizzie, we would still be in that back room with you sewing until dawn, he would say, as if our success was exclusively his work. And little by little, I began to believe it. After all, it was he who dealt with the banks, with the big clients, with the numbers. What did I know beyond sewing and taking care of the children? By 1975, our factory employed 28 people. We had bought a bigger house in a better neighborhood. The children attended good schools. On the outside, we were the image of the successful family. Robert was respected in the local business community, and I was seen as the dedicated wife, exemplary mother, who helped in the family business. But at home, the silence grew between us. We became like 2 strangers sharing the same space. We slept in the same bed but rarely touched. Conversations were limited to the children and practical matters. Robert spent more and more time away, and I wondered where I had gone wrong, what I had done to lose that love that seemed so strong in the beginning. One night in October 1978, Robert informed me that we would need to travel to a different state the following week. An important supplier wanted to meet us personally before closing a big contract. It will be good for us, he said. A few days away from the city, just the 2 of us, like old times. There was something in his tone that seemed strange to me, but I accepted. Perhaps it was a chance to rekindle our relationship. The preparations for the trip excited me. I left the children with my older sister, who adored her nieces and nephew. I prepared light clothes, since we were going to a warmer region. Robert seemed more attentive, asking if I was excited, if I needed anything for the trip. This behavior, after so much indifference, made me hopeful. On the eve of the trip, while Robert was taking a shower, I decided to organize the clothes he would take. That's when I found in the inside pocket of his gray suit jacket the note that would change everything. A small piece of paper carefully folded, written in delicate handwriting that was definitely not mine. Everything is ready for Thursday. The accident should happen at the mountain curve, where there are no guards. Make sure you will be unharmed. I'll be waiting in Atlanta. As we planned, with the insurance and the factory, we can finally live the life we deserve. I can't wait to start our life together, without her in the way. Love you, R. I read and reread those words, trying to understand, or rather, trying to understand what was clearly before my eyes. My husband and his lover were planning to kill me, and the date was set for just 3 days away during our trip. With trembling hands, I put the note back exactly where it was. Robert couldn't know that I had discovered it. No, I still needed to think, to plan, to act with caution. My life depended on it, and I had only 3 days. That night was the longest of my life. Lying next to the man who was planning my death, I pretended to sleep while my mind worked frantically. Every noise in the house startled me. Every movement Robert made in bed made my heart race. Would he notice my irregular breathing? Would he notice my cold hands, my body rigid with fear? The moonlight came in through the gap in the curtain, illuminating his profile. I observed that face I had known for 15 years, the same face that smiled at our children, that looked me in the eyes during our promises of eternal love. How could it now harbor such dark thoughts? How could he coldly plan to end my existence? When the clock struck 5 in the morning and the first birds began to sing outside, I made my decision. I would not be a victim. I would not leave my children motherless. I needed to act, but with intelligence. One wrong step and Robert would anticipate his plans, or worse, include the children in them. I got up silently, as I did every morning, and prepared breakfast as if it were a normal day. The children were still sleeping. When Robert appeared in the kitchen, I made an effort to maintain my composure. "Did you sleep well, dear?" I asked, serving him coffee. "Like a rock," he replied, smiling. That smile that once warmed my heart now gave me chills. "Excited for the trip?" "Very," I lied, returning the smile. "It will be good to get out of the routine a bit." "Certainly," he said. And for a moment I thought I saw something sinister in his gaze, or perhaps it was just my fear projecting shadows where they didn't exist. After Robert left for the factory, I called my brother Joe in Baltimore. I couldn't risk using the factory phone. Robert could find out. Joe was the only one I trusted completely. 3 years older than me, he had become a police detective after years serving as an investigator. "I need to see you today," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's urgent, but I can't talk on the phone." There was silence on the other end of the line. Joe had always been perceptive. "Something serious happened, didn't it?" he asked. "Yes," I whispered, looking around, although I was alone at home. "But I don't want to involve the children. Can I come to you today?" "Of course, I'll be waiting for you." I hung up the phone and took a deep breath. The next step would be to invent an excuse for Robert. I said I needed to visit a notion store in Baltimore that had exclusive pieces for a special dress I was making for an important client's wife. It was a plausible lie. Robert knew how much I tried to please important clients. "You'll go and come back today?" he asked when I called the factory. "Yes, it's quick," I replied. "I'll be back before dinner." "Are you sure you can't leave it until after our trip?" I felt a chill down my spine. There was an insistence in his voice that wasn't normal. "Unfortunately not. The order is for next week," I invented. "But don't worry, it won't interfere with our preparations." He agreed somewhat reluctantly. I dressed carefully, choosing clothes I would normally wear to visit suppliers. Nothing could arouse suspicion. Before leaving, I entered Robert's home office and, with a pounding heart, searched for more evidence. In the back of a locked drawer that I opened with a paperclip, I found documents that confirmed my worst fears. There was a life insurance policy in my name, recently contracted, with a value much higher than would be reasonable for our situation. I also found a new will supposedly signed by me, or rather, with my signature forged, where I supposedly left everything to Robert in case of my death. In a separate folder were the deeds to the factory and the house, with recent alterations that I didn't remember signing. With trembling hands, I made copies of the most important documents, using the small mimeograph we kept for factory work. I carefully put everything in my purse and left, but not before kissing my children who were coming back from school for lunch. Would it be the last time I saw them? The thought terrified me, but I pushed it away. I needed to stay strong, lucid. The trip to Baltimore never seemed so long. On the bus, every bump, every stop made me look out the window, fearing to see Robert's car following me. When I finally arrived at the precinct where Joe worked, my legs barely supported me. My brother immediately realized that something was very wrong. He took me to a private room and closed the door. "Tell me, Lizzie, what happened?" The words came out in a torrent. I told him about the note, about the documents I had found, about the planned trip. I showed him the copies I had made. Joe listened in silence, his face becoming more serious with each minute. "Are you sure about this?" he asked when I finished. "It's a very serious accusation." "I am," I replied, feeling a tear run down my cheek. "Please, Joe, you have to believe me. I'm not crazy. He's going to kill me if I go on this trip." Joe examined the documents thoughtfully. "The insurance alone is suspicious," he commented. "And this signature on the will doesn't look much like yours, but we need more evidence to catch him." "More evidence?" I exclaimed incredulously. "What else do you need? A written confession?" "That would be ideal," he replied without humor. "Look, Lizzie, I know this type of case well. If we act precipitously, without concrete evidence, he could escape, and then you'll be in even greater danger." I ran my hands over my face, desperate. "And what do you suggest I do? Go on the trip and wait for him to push me off a cliff?" "Of course not," replied Joe, holding my hands. "You're not going on that trip, no way, but you also can't just disappear. That would alert him." At that moment, an idea began to form in my mind. A risky idea, but one that could work. "What if," I began hesitantly, "what if I pretended not to know anything, but created a situation where he would need to postpone his plans?" Joe looked at me with interest. "What kind of situation?" "I'm not sure yet," I confessed. "But it needs to be something that doesn't raise suspicion, something that seems completely natural." We spent the next few hours developing a plan. Joe would use his contacts to investigate Robert's finances more thoroughly, and this R from the note. I, in turn, would arrange a reason to postpone the trip without raising suspicion. When I left the precinct, it was almost night. Joe insisted on accompanying me to the bus stop. "Are you sure you don't want to stay here with me and Teresa?" he asked, mentioning his wife. "It would be safer." "I can't," I replied. "The children are at home, and if I disappear like this, Robert will suspect something. I need to maintain appearances until we have a concrete plan." On the bus back, I mentally worked out what I would say to Robert. I decided I would use our youngest son as an excuse. Richard, at just 8 years old, had presented unexplained fevers in recent months. Nothing serious, according to the doctors, but enough to give me a plausible justification. When I arrived home, Robert was already there helping the boys with their homework. Such a normal scene, so familiar, that for a moment I questioned whether I had imagined it all. But then I saw the gray suit jacket hanging on the hallway coat rack, and reality hit me again. "Did you get what you needed in Baltimore?" he asked casually. "Yes," I replied, forcing a smile. "And I even had time to visit Teresa and Joe. It had been a while since I'd seen them." Something flashed in his eyes. Concern? Anger? But it quickly disappeared. "Good," he said, turning his attention back to the school books. "Dinner is almost ready. Lucy is finishing preparing it." That night, as I served dinner and listened to the children's stories about their day at school, I felt like an actress on a strange stage. Every gesture, every word, every smile was calculated. I needed to appear normal, unconcerned. Robert was watching me more than usual, or was it just my imagination? After the children went to bed, he sat with me in the living room, a glass of brandy in his hand, a recent habit that I had never approved of. "So, is everything ready for the trip?" "We leave the day after tomorrow," he commented, watching me over his glass. This was the moment. I took a deep breath. "Actually," I began, trying to sound natural, "I was wondering if we could postpone it for a week." He visibly stiffened. "Postpone it? Why?" "It's Richard," I explained, grateful that my voice didn't tremble. "Today, when I got home, he had a fever again. I'm worried. What if it's that mononucleosis the doctor mentioned? I wouldn't feel right traveling and leaving him like this." The children will be fine with your sister, Robert argued, a hint of irritation in his voice. And it's just a little fever. You worry too much. Even so, I insisted, firm but gentle. I prefer to postpone it just for a week. I want to make sure he's okay before we travel. Robert stared at me for a long moment. I held his gaze, although inside I was trembling. Finally, he sighed. All right, he conceded, but I noticed his displeasure. I'll call Wilson tomorrow and reschedule. But just 1 week, Lizzie. This contract is too important for us to lose. Of course, dear, I agreed, feeling momentary relief. I had gained time, little, but precious. That night, again, I pretended to sleep while planning my next step. The extra week I had secured would be crucial. Joe would need this time to gather the necessary evidence, and I would need it to strengthen my courage, because deep down I knew that the real battle was yet to come. Beside me, Robert slept peacefully, unaware that his perfect plan was beginning to crumble. And I, for the first time since finding that fateful note, allowed myself a glimmer of hope. I would survive this for myself, for my children, and perhaps, just perhaps, emerge stronger from the other side of this darkness. The next few days were an exercise in self-control that I never imagined myself capable of. Every breakfast, every family dinner, every casual conversation with Robert was like walking on broken glass. I smiled when I wanted to scream. I pretended normalcy when inside I was trembling with fear and anger. Richard, my youngest, without knowing it, became my alibi. I asked my friend Dorothy, a nurse at the health clinic, to help me. She would visit daily and, in front of Robert, examine the boy and talk about symptoms we needed to monitor. Richard, always smart, sensed something strange was happening, but a look from me was enough for him to play his part to perfection, complaining about non-existent headaches and pretending to be weak when his father was around. I think he's getting better, I commented to Robert on the 4th day as I washed the dinner dishes. But Dr. Jenkins asked for a few more days of observation. You know how these childhood viruses can suddenly get complicated. Robert banged his fist on the table, startling the children. A few more days, Lizzie. We've already postponed it once. Wilson won't wait forever. I turned to him, drying my hands on my apron, forcing myself to appear calm while my heart was racing. Just 3 more days, dear. What are 3 days compared to our son's health? He stared at me for a long time, and I saw something calculating in his eyes that I had never noticed before. How could I have been blind for so long? How did I not see the coldness that hid behind that charm? Fine, he finally agreed, forcing a smile for the children who were watching the scene in confusion. 3 days, not 1 more. That same night, after everyone was asleep, I quietly got out of bed and went to the phone in the kitchen. I called Joe, speaking in almost inaudible whispers. Did you find anything? I did, he replied, his grave voice. And it's not pretty, Lizzie. Your husband has been living a double life for at least 2 years. The woman's name is Rebecca Martin, a secretary at the shipping company you use. They have an apartment in Atlanta where they meet regularly during his business trips. I leaned against the wall, feeling my legs weaken. Rebecca Martin. So this was the face behind the R in the note. A woman I had probably greeted at some company event. Maybe I had even smiled at her, not knowing that she was planning my death. There's more, Joe continued. Robert withdrew practically all of your savings last month, and the factory is drowning in debts that he hid from you. From what I found out, he forged your signature on several loans. My God, I murmured, holding the phone tightly. Why, Joe? Why would he do this? Money, Lizzie. It's always about money. The insurance in your name is of very high value. With you out of the way, he would receive enough to pay off the debts and still have enough left to start a new life with her. Silent tears ran down my face. They weren't tears of pain for the betrayal. Those I had already shed in secret in the past few days. They were tears of anger, of indignation. How could he? How could he turn our 15 years together, our children, our shared dreams into nothing? What do I do now? I asked, wiping my face with determination. I already have enough evidence for a formal complaint, replied Joe. But it would be your word against his in the case of the murder plan. We need something more concrete, a confession, ideally. And how would we get that? There was a pause on the other end of the line. I have a plan, but it's risky, very risky. The next morning, while preparing coffee, I accidentally dropped a cup that shattered on the kitchen floor. Robert, sitting at the table reading the newspaper, looked up irritated. Sorry, I said, bending down to pick up the pieces. I'm so distracted lately. I think it's the worry about Richard and this trip. He just grunted and returned to his newspaper. He didn't offer to help me. Another sign of the small changes that had occurred over the years and that I, in my loving blindness, had ignored. I was thinking, I continued as I swept up the pieces, that you could go ahead to the meeting with Wilson. I'll catch up with you as soon as Richard is better. I don't want you to miss this opportunity because of me. Robert lowered the newspaper and something flashed in his eyes. Interest? Relief? You wouldn't mind? Of course not, I replied with a smile. I know how important this contract is for us. I can catch a bus and meet you at the hotel the next day, or at most 2 days later. He seemed to consider the idea for a moment and then nodded. That makes sense. I'll go ahead tomorrow. I'll settle the initial details with Wilson, and you can join me later. The mountain road is dangerous, but Dave can take you. Dave was our driver at the factory, a trustworthy gentleman who had worked with us for years. Actually, I said, trying to sound casual, I prefer to go alone. You know how I get carsick on mountain roads? I don't want to embarrass myself in front of Dave. Robert raised an eyebrow but didn't insist. As you wish, but let me know when you're leaving so I can meet you at the bus station. Of course, I agreed, feeling my heart race. The plan was in motion. That afternoon, while Robert was at the factory, I finalized the preparations with Joe. My brother would come with 2 trusted investigators the next day before Robert left. The plan was simple and terribly risky. I would confront Robert about the note and the discoveries, with Joe and the police hidden in the next room recording everything. If he confesses, we'll have evidence to arrest him, explained Joe. If not, I'll be in even greater danger, I completed, feeling the weight of the situation. But what choice do we have? That night, I hardly slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Robert's face transformed into a mask of hatred, his hands extended towards me, not with affection, but with murderous intent. How could a man I once loved so much transform into this? When the sun finally rose, I was already up. I prepared a special breakfast. Eggs, bacon, fresh bread, Robert's favorite. It would be our last meal together, one way or another. The children had already left for school. I had insisted that Richard was well enough to go, despite Robert's protests. I didn't want them to witness what was to come. Joe arrived at 9, accompanied by 2 men discreetly dressed in civilian clothes. They quickly installed a recorder in the room next to the living room and positioned themselves, invisible but alert. My brother held my cold hands in his. Are you sure about this, Lizzie? We can still find another way. No, I replied, feeling a strange calm envelop me. I need to end this today. I won't live another day with this fear. When Robert's car parked at the entrance, Joe and the others hid. I stayed in the living room, hands crossed in my lap, the incriminating note on the center table. I heard the door open, the familiar footsteps in the hallway. Lizzie, I'm on my way out. I just came to get the document folder I forgot. He entered the living room and stopped abruptly when he saw me sitting, serious, waiting for him. What is it? Did something happen to Richard? Sit down, Robert, I said, in a voice I didn't recognize as my own. Firm, without trembling. I don't have time for this now, Lizzie. The train leaves in an hour. Sit down, I repeated, this time with more force. Or should I call you by another name, perhaps murderer? His face visibly paled. For an instant, I thought he would deny it, yell at me, leave slamming the door. But then, slowly, he sat in the armchair across from me. What are you talking about, Lizzie? Have you gone crazy? Without saying a word, I pushed the note towards him. His eyes went down to the paper and then back to me, now icy, calculating. Where did you find this? In the pocket of your jacket, I replied, on the eve of our supposed trip to visit a supplier, a trip from which you plan to return alone. A heavy silence fell over us. Robert seemed to be calculating his options, his eyes going from the door to me, to the note. This is absurd, he finally said, forcing a laugh. This note could mean anything. You're interpreting everything wrong, as always. That imagination of yours. I'm not imagining the millionaire life insurance policy you took out in my name, I cut in, nor the will with my forged signature, nor the meetings with Rebecca Martin in Atlanta. He got up abruptly, his face contorted in a mask of fury I had never seen before. You've been spying on me? Who gave you that right? The same right you gave yourself to plan my death, I replied without backing down. 15 years together, Robert, 3 children, and you were going to push me off a cliff as if I were nothing. He ran his hands through his hair, visibly agitated. You don't understand anything, Lizzie. Nothing. The factory is drowning in debts. We have creditors knocking at the door. In a few months, we'll lose everything. Everything? And the solution was to kill me? I asked incredulously. Why? For money? For her? For both of us, he shouted, punching the table. For me, for you, for our children. The insurance would pay all the debts. There would be enough left for the children to have a good education. While you lived happily with your lover, I completed bitterly. He came closer, his eyes shining with a mixture of anger and desperation. It was she who suggested it, you know. Rebecca said it would be quick, painless. An accident on the mountain road no one would suspect, and everyone would come out ahead. Everyone except me, I replied, feeling a strange calm envelope me. I would be dead, Robert. But it would be for a greater good, he insisted, as if this justified everything. Don't you see? I was sacrificing myself too. I would live with the guilt for the rest of my life. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a stranger, a man I no longer recognized. A man capable of rationalizing the murder of his own wife as a necessary sacrifice. When did you turn into this monster? He came closer, and I instinctively backed away. I'm not a monster, he said softly. I'm a cornered man, doing what's necessary for his family. No, I replied, standing up. A real man would face his problems with honesty. He would tell his wife about the debts. He would seek solutions together. He wouldn't plan to kill her. Something changed in his eyes. Then the mask of rationalization fell, revealing a cold, calculating fury. And what are you going to do now, Lizzie? Report me to the police? Destroy our family? Our children will grow up knowing their father is in jail. Is that what you want? I want justice, I replied simply. He gave a humorless laugh. Justice? Don't be naive. It's your word against mine. This note could be about anything. And who would believe you? A simple hysterical housewife against me? A respected businessman? It was my turn to smile, though without joy. It's not my word against yours, Robert. It's your own confession. At that moment, as agreed, Joe and the 2 investigators came out of the room, the recorder in hand. Robert turned pale, looking from one to the other like a cornered animal. You, he began, turning to me, his fists clenched. Joe stepped forward, placing himself between us. Don't even think about it, he warned, his voice hard as steel. You're in enough trouble already. Attempted homicide, document forgery, fraud. Do you want to add assault on an officer to the list? The next moments were a blur. Robert tried to escape, but the investigators were faster. There were shouts, threats, promises of revenge. I watched it all, as if I were outside my body, in a strange state of numbness. When they finally took him away, handcuffed and still shouting that I would regret it, I fell sitting on the sofa, trembling uncontrollably. Joe sat beside me, putting his arm around my shoulders. It's over, Lizzie, he murmured. You did it. You're safe now. But we both knew it wasn't over. In many ways, it was just the beginning. There were children to protect, the truth to explain, a business drowning in debt to save, an entire life to rebuild. I looked out the window, seeing the police car drive away, taking the man who once vowed to love me until death did us part. Death almost did part us, in fact, but not in the way he had planned. At that moment, I made a promise to myself. I would survive this too. I would transform this tragedy into strength, this betrayal into a lesson, for myself, for my children, for the future we still had a right to build. The path would be long and painful, but I would walk it, one step at a time. That night, with Robert in jail and the reality of our situation exposed like an open wound, I sat in the empty kitchen, waiting for my children to return from my sister's house. The silence was deafening. 15 years of marriage, an entire life built together, crumbled in a matter of days. How would I tell the children? What would I say to explain why their father would not be coming home? Mark was 14, Lucy 12, and little Richard just 8. Too young to understand the monstrosity of what had happened, but old enough to feel the pain of absence, the stigma, the inevitable questions. When the three entered through the door, their faces animated by an afternoon of play with their cousins, my heart tightened. I called them close. We sat in the living room and, in simple, carefully chosen words, I told them that their father had done wrong things, things that had hurt our family and that he would need to stay away for a while. "Doesn't he love us anymore?" asked Richard, with tears in his eyes. "Love is complicated," I replied, caressing his hair. "Sometimes people make wrong choices, even while loving. But I love you enough for both of us, and we'll be okay, I promise." Mark, always the most observant, looked at me with an intensity that suggested he understood more than I had said. Lucy cried silently, hugging her already worn teddy bear. That night was the first of many in which we all slept together in my big bed, like puppies seeking warmth and security. The next morning, the practical reality of our situation hit me with full force. Joe arrived early, bringing the factory documents he had managed to recover from Robert's files. "The situation is worse than we thought, Lizzie," he explained, spreading papers on the kitchen table. "Robert not only took out loans, he diverted money, failed to pay suppliers, was late on taxes. The factory is practically bankrupt." I looked at the numbers, at the complex legal terms, feeling myself sink into a quicksand of despair. How could I, who only knew how to sew and manage the house, face all of that? "Maybe it's better to sell what's left," Joe suggested gently. "Liquidate as many debts as possible and start from scratch." "Sell," I repeated, the words seeming strange in my mouth. "Sell the factory we built with so much sacrifice, which supports not only our family but 28 other employees' families." "No, Joe, there must be another way." He looked at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Lizzie, you have no experience with management, with finances. How do you intend to save a business on the brink of bankruptcy?" I raised my chin, feeling a fierce determination born within me. "I'll learn. I've always been quick to learn." In the days that followed, I transformed the living room into an improvised office. I hired the factory accountant, Mr. Reynolds, an old gentleman who had always treated me with respect, to teach me the basics of accounting and management. I spent nights studying while the children slept, absorbing terms and concepts that had previously seemed so distant from my world. The first visit to the factory after Robert's arrest was a trial by fire. The employees looked at me with a mixture of pity and distrust. Some whispered when I passed by. Others, more loyal to Robert, barely disguised their disdain for this woman who dared to step into the male territory of business. I gathered everyone in the main warehouse. My hands were trembling, but my voice remained firm. "I know what you're thinking," I began. "What can this woman, who only knows how to sew and raise children, do to save our jobs?" Maybe you're right to doubt. I don't have Robert's experience, nor his contacts, but I have something that he lost along the way: integrity and the determination of a woman who has nothing to lose. I briefly explained the situation of the company without going into the sordid details of Robert's betrayal. I talked about the debts, about the challenges we would face, and then I proposed a plan. We will need to make sacrifices for a few months. We might have to work more for less. We might need to reduce production, focus only on the most profitable lines. It won't be easy. Some of you may prefer to look for more secure jobs, and I'll understand. But for those who stay, I promise, if we can overcome this crisis, everyone will be justly rewarded. At the end of the meeting, 3 employees resigned. The other 25 decided to stay. Many of them, the same women who years earlier had taught me the secrets of industrial sewing, who had applauded when I gave birth to my children, now looked at me not with pity, but with a new form of respect. The year 1979 was the hardest of my life. I woke up at 5 in the morning to prepare breakfast for my children, get them ready for school. I worked in the factory until dusk, often sewing alongside the workers when we were short-staffed. I returned home, helped with homework, prepared dinner, and then, when everyone was asleep, I studied balance sheets, proposals, debt renegotiation strategies. The divorce was another challenge. In those days, a divorced woman carried a heavy stigma, especially in our conservative social circle. Neighbors who had previously invited me for afternoon coffee now crossed the street to avoid meeting me. Mothers of my children's schoolmates forgot to include them in birthday parties. The parish priest suggested I reconsider my decision, as if forgiving an attempted murder were a Christian virtue. But for every door that closed, another opened. I discovered an unexpected support network. Women who had been through similar situations, though rarely as extreme. Local merchants who offered small discounts or extended deadlines. Mark's teacher, who began giving extra math lessons to the boy, recognizing in him a talent that his own father had never noticed. At the factory, I implemented changes that Robert had always resisted. We created a line of children's clothing using scraps that were previously discarded. A suggestion from Lucy, who loved the colorful clothes I made for her dolls. I redesigned the commission system, offering incentives for those who brought new customers or innovative ideas. And most importantly, I brought my female experience to a business that, under Robert's management, completely ignored the real needs of the women who bought our clothes. "Why are the pockets on dresses so small?" I asked once during a design meeting. "Because it's more elegant," replied the designer, repeating what he had always heard from Robert. "But is it practical? A woman who works, who has children, doesn't need to carry things?" That simple question led to a complete reformulation of our women's line. Functional pockets, fabrics that didn't wrinkle easily, details that made breastfeeding easier for young mothers. Little by little, against all odds, the factory began to recover, not without stumbles, of course. There were months when we could barely pay the suppliers, nights when I cried hidden in the bathroom, terrified by the possibility of failing, of losing everything, of not being able to support my children. Robert's trial took place in mid-1980. It was an additional ordeal, reliving everything again, facing the curious looks, the invasive questions. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison for attempted qualified homicide and various financial crimes. Rebecca Martin, his lover, received a lesser sentence as an accomplice, but enough to ensure that both would be out of our lives for a good while. The children reacted in different ways. Mark, the oldest, became my right hand at the factory, showing a surprising aptitude for numbers and business. Lucy turned to art, transforming her pain into beautiful drawings that would later decorate our packaging. Richard, too small to fully understand, alternated between moments of anger and deep longing for his father. In 1982, I received an offer to buy the factory for a considerable amount. A businessman from New York had heard about our innovative children's line and wanted to incorporate it into his chain of stores. The offer was tempting, enough money to pay all the remaining debts and still live comfortably for years. I called my children and the oldest employees for a meeting. I explained the proposal, the pros and cons. "What do you think?" I asked, genuinely interested in their opinions. "Selling would mean financial security," pondered Mark, always practical. "But the factory is our life," argued Lucy. "It's more than just a business." One of the oldest seamstresses, Mrs. Peterson, who had taught me my first stitches when I entered the workshop so many years ago, timidly raised her hand. "You built this from scratch twice," she said. "First with him and then alone, when everyone thought you wouldn't make it. This factory is your testimony, Mrs. Morrison. It's priceless." Her words touched something deep in me. I refused the offer. Instead, I proposed a partnership. The businessman would sell our children's line in his stores, but the production would remain with us, allowing us to expand without losing control. It was the right decision. In the years that followed, New Horizon Textiles, which I renamed Phoenix Apparel in 1983, symbolizing our rebirth from the ashes, grew steadily and sustainably. From 28 employees, we went to 52, then to 87. We opened a branch in Milwaukee, then another in Indianapolis. In 1985, I was invited to give a talk at the Chamber of Commerce on female entrepreneurship. Me, who had barely completed high school, speaking to businessmen and executives with university diplomas. I trembled so much the night before that Lucy joked I would create an earthquake. But when I went up on stage, looking at that mostly male audience, something incredible happened. The words flowed naturally, without fear. "I'm not here because I'm special," I began. "I'm here because I'm ordinary. An ordinary woman who, like so many others, was forced by circumstances to discover a strength she didn't know she possessed. True entrepreneurship isn't necessarily born from ambition, but often from necessity, from the refusal to be a victim of circumstances." That talk opened doors I had never imagined. Other women began to seek me out for guidance, to share their own stories of overcoming. We formed an informal support group that years later would become the Association of Women Entrepreneurs, an entity that today helps hundreds of women start their own businesses. In 1988, Robert was released after serving 8 years of his sentence with a reduction for good behavior. I learned from mutual acquaintances that he left Chicago, moving to Nebraska. I never saw him again. The children, now teenagers and young adults, chose not to resume contact. They were their decisions, which I respected, although I always left the door open in case they changed their minds. Time passed. The children grew up. Mark graduated in business administration and gradually took over the financial management of the company. Lucy studied design and revolutionized our collections with her innate talent. Richard, the youngest, who witnessed so little of his parents' marriage, became a lawyer specializing in women's rights, his way of transforming our family trauma into something positive for others. In 1990, at 47, when I had already accepted that my love life was over, I met Edward, a widowed university professor, during a business fair. It wasn't love at first sight. We both carried too many scars for such youthful romanticism. It was something deeper. A mutual recognition, a silent understanding that we had both been through the fire and survived. Our relationship progressed slowly, with the caution of those who know the price of broken trust. We married in 1992, in a simple ceremony, just for family and close friends. Edward never tried to replace Robert as a father. The children were already adults, after all. Instead, he became a friend, a counselor, someone they could count on without the complications of the past. Looking back now, at 82, I see that those 3 days, the 3 days that separated my life from the death planned by my husband, were, in fact, the beginning, not the end. The beginning of a journey that took me to places I never imagined, that forced me to grow, to learn, to discover capabilities I didn't know I possessed. I don't say this to romanticize trauma. There's nothing romantic about betrayal, about violence, about the destruction of a family. I say it because I learned that sometimes it's precisely when everything seems lost that we discover who we really are and what we're capable of. If you had asked me when I was young what I expected from life by the time I reached 80, I would never have imagined being here sharing my story with so many people. I would never have predicted the peace I found after so much turbulence. And I certainly wouldn't have imagined that those 3 days of terror would transform into the driving force that would guide my entire subsequent existence. The early 2000s brought new challenges, Globalization hit the American textile sector hard. Suddenly, we were competing with Chinese products at prices we couldn't dream of matching. Many traditional factories closed their doors, unable to adapt to the new times. Phoenix, however, once again honored its name. Mark, my firstborn, who then directed financial operations, proposed a radical restructuring. "We can't compete in volume and price, Mom," he explained during a tense family meeting. "But we can stand out in quality, exclusivity, and purpose." It was the beginning of our transition to a more sustainable business model. We began working exclusively with organic cotton and environmentally responsible materials, long before it became a trend. We reduced the volume of production, but increased the added value of each piece. We implemented a training program for women in vulnerable situations, offering not just jobs, but careers. Lucy, who had become a nationally respected designer, created a special line called Rebirth. Each piece told a story of overcoming, and part of the profits went to organizations supporting women victims of domestic violence. The project won international awards and brought visibility we never actively sought, but which ended up strengthening our brand even more. Richard, my youngest, the lawyer, established the New Horizon Foundation, a nonprofit entity dedicated to offering free legal assistance to women at risk. "If my mother had had this support," he used to say in his lectures, "perhaps her journey would have been less lonely." In 2005, I received a phone call that stirred old wounds. It was Robert's lawyer informing me of his death. A car accident in the Nebraska mountains, ironically similar to what he had planned for me decades earlier. For a moment, I didn't know how to react. I didn't feel joy nor deep sadness, just a strange feeling of closure. I shared the news with my children individually, respecting each one's right to process the information in their own way. Mark received the news with a silent nod. Lucy cried, not for the father she knew, but for the father he could have been. Richard, who kept few real memories of Robert, seemed the most shaken, perhaps because death definitively sealed the impossibility of a reconciliation that deep down he had always wanted. We decided together to attend the funeral, not out of social obligation or appearances, but to close that chapter with dignity. The ceremony was small. Robert had apparently led a discreet life after prison. Rebecca, the former lover, was not present. I later learned that they had separated a few months after his release. Some people looked at me with curiosity, others with discomfort. I remained serene, holding hands with Edward, my second husband, whose silent presence was my safe harbor. Back in Chicago, I felt an unexpected lightness, as if an invisible weight had been removed. It wasn't forgiveness. I never found in myself the capacity to completely forgive what he had done. It was something different, more complex, an acceptance, perhaps the understanding that that part of my story, however painful it was, no longer had power over my present or future. In 2008, at 65, I decided to gradually withdraw from the active management of the company. It wasn't an easy decision. Phoenix had become my identity for so long that I feared losing myself without it. But Edward, with his quiet wisdom, reminded me, "You are not the factory, Lizzie. The factory is just one of the many things you've built." The transition was meticulously planned. Mark took over the presidency with Lucy as creative director. Richard remained exclusively in the foundation, but actively participated in the company's advisory board. I created for myself the role of guardian of values, a position that allowed me to continue contributing with my experience without interfering in the daily decisions of the new generation. This withdrawal opened space for new discoveries. I went back to studying formally, fulfilling an old dream of completing high school. To everyone's surprise, including mine, I didn't stop there. At 67, I entered college to study history. I chose to study specifically the role of women in the industrial development of America. My colleagues, mostly young people with less than a third of my age, initially looked at me as a curiosity, an eccentric old lady. Gradually, I became a kind of informal mentor to many of them, especially the girls who struggled to balance studies and work. Edward, always my biggest supporter, joked that he had married a college student. His support was fundamental when in 2012 I received a diagnosis of breast cancer. I faced the disease as I faced all other challenges in life. One day at a time, surrounded by my family, refusing to be defined by fear. The chemotherapy was brutal. I lost my hair, my energy, often even hope. There were days when the simple act of getting out of bed seemed an impossible mountain to climb. On one of those particularly difficult mornings, Lucy appeared with a mysterious box. "Open it, Mom," she insisted, with that smile that had always lit up her eyes since she was a little girl. Inside the box was a carefully assembled album. Each page contained photos and messages from women, dozens of them. Women who had worked in the factory, who had been helped by the foundation, who had heard my talks, read interviews, or simply known my story through other people. Each one shared how my example had impacted her life, inspiring her to seek independence, to not accept abusive relationships, to believe in her own potential. "See, Mom," said Lucy, wiping away my tears. "This is your true legacy. Not the factory, not the awards, these lives you've touched, these women who found strength in your example." That album became my talisman during treatment. On bad days, I would page through it, remembering that my story served a greater purpose than myself. In 2013, I was declared in remission. The experience with cancer, although terrifying, brought a new dimension to my understanding of vulnerability and strength, how they can coexist in the same space, in the same person. In 2015, to celebrate my 72nd birthday and cancer remission, my children organized a surprise, the publication of my memoirs. I had sporadically written diaries throughout the years, mainly in the most difficult periods, as a way to organize my thoughts. I never imagined that those private reflections could interest other people. The book, titled 3 Days: A Journey of Survival and Rebirth, became an unexpected editorial success. I was invited to television programs, radio interviews, literary events. At 72, I found myself in a new chapter, sharing my story, no longer just in small circles, but with a national audience. At first, I felt uncomfortable with the exposure. There were parts of my story that still hurt when touched, memories I preferred to keep private. But then, the letters started coming, hundreds of them, from women of all ages and social backgrounds, telling how my story had given them courage to leave abusive relationships, to report violence, to start over after devastating betrayals. From sons and daughters who had grown up in violent homes and found in my journey a path for their own healing. One of those letters in particular changed my perspective on public exposure. It was from a 23-year-old woman, the same age I was when I met Robert. She wrote that she was about to marry a man who showed the same warning signs that I had learned to recognize too late in my life: excessive control, gradual isolation from friends and family, constant diminishment of her abilities. "Your story saved me before I even needed to be saved," she wrote. "I ended the engagement. It's difficult and painful now, but I know I made the right choice." It was then that I fully understood the power of testimony. By sharing my wounds, I was helping other women avoid similar injuries. The shame I once felt, that feeling of having been foolish, of having been so completely deceived, transformed into purpose. The last few years have brought other joys and challenges. Edward passed away in 2020 after a brief but intense battle against pancreatic cancer. His departure left an immense void, but also a deep gratitude for the 30 years we shared. It was he who taught me that true love doesn't diminish, doesn't control, doesn't threaten, only strengthens and liberates. Today, at 82, I am a grandmother to 7 grandchildren and a great-grandmother to 2 little ones who fill me with hope for the future. Phoenix Apparel continues to thrive now under the leadership of the 3rd generation. My granddaughter Claire, Mark's daughter, recently took over the direction of innovation and sustainability. The New Horizon Foundation has expanded its operations to 5 states, offering not just legal assistance, but also temporary shelters and professional training programs for women in vulnerable situations. When I look back at those terrible 3 days when I discovered the murder plan and had to find in myself the courage to face the truth about my marriage, about the man I chose as the father of my children, I realize they were days of death, yes, but not the physical death that Robert had planned. It was the death of a version of me, the submissive woman who accepted being diminished, who doubted her capacity, who believed she needed a man to define her worth. From that death was born the woman I'm proud to have become, not a victim, but a survivor, not just a survivor, but a builder, a woman who transformed her pain into purpose, her fear into determination, her personal story into a beacon for others who are still navigating stormy seas. If there's a message I'd like to leave for you who are watching me today, it's this: there are no perfect happy endings. There are courageous new beginnings. There are scars that transform into medals of honor. There is a strength inside each of us that we only discover when all other options are exhausted. And above all, there is always, always the possibility of transforming the greatest betrayal into your greatest rebirth. You just need to take the first step. As I did on that distant day when I discovered that only 3 days remained until my planned death, and I decided that instead they would be the first 3 days of the rest of my life. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for sharing a bit of my journey, and remember, your story isn't over yet. The next chapter is in your hands. Oh, and if this story touched your heart in some way, please don't forget to leave your like on this video and subscribe to the Grandma Diary channel. Each like, each subscription helps me continue sharing these life and overcoming stories with more people. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and if any part of my story resonated with your own experience. Until the next video, my dears.